Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm here with Ollie Kenchington, and we're going to be looking at some of the footage that he shot with the C300 Mark III and get his thoughts and have a little discussion and see what we think of this new awesome camera from Canon. Ollie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks very much, mate, for allowing me to come and talk about the new camera.
No worries. I mean, crack on, mate. So I don't know what you've got planned, but I'm excited to I'm excited to see it.
So would you want to start off showing the trailer?
Yeah, can do. Yeah.
Is that something that you do your end, or do you want me to do that from here?
I'll do it my end for the YouTube people on Discord. If you I can put it in the chat for you guys to have a look at. And if not, head over to the YouTube now and I'll play it out there.
Cool. Hi, I'm Ollie Kenchington from PROREPAIRS, and welcome to this first look at the newly announced Canon C300 Mark III.
And we're back.
Nice. So yeah, that was just a little teaser actually for the longer review, which I thought I'd save everyone 5 odd minutes of sitting through that whilst we're live. They can go and watch that in their own time. The I call it a review. It's just a first look, really. It's I was very flattered, I have to say, actually, that Canon approached me and asked me to have a look at the C300 Mark III. It's not lost on me that I'm not a DOP. I'm not one of these. I'm not an Ian Murray, who's a man that I very much look up to and admire. My main job is as a colorist, and although I've been operating camera for many years, it is very much kind of just a passion of mine. It's certainly never in a million years would I describe myself as a DOP. I do a huge amount of stuff as a filmmaker, and I like to be involved in pretty much all aspects of pre-production and production, but post is really my main bag. And I think it's coming at it from that point of view is I think where Canon see value in giving a camera to me like this to have a look at, because I'm not one of these people that just takes spec written down on a piece of paper as any kind of indication of finished image quality. I'm one of these people that wants to interrogate footage from new cameras as much as possible, which is a big reason as to why I always, if I can, allow people to download samples and the footage that I've shot, and the first look film that's up on Vimeo. We'll pop the link up in Discord and for others to follow through if they haven't seen it already. But in the description of the first look film that's up on my Vimeo page, there's a link, a Dropbox link, where people can download. There's 25p, 50p, 120p raw files. There's some daylight chart tests. There's HDR clips, because one of the nice features of the new camera is the ability to record direct into PQ or HLG without having to go through the RAW. So even if you're in XFABC, you can direct capture into those color spaces and gammas, which automatically just gets picked up as you move through to your NLE. So there's a few sample files in those modes. So I always like it when people do that. It always reminds me actually of in years gone by. There's a very well-known American DP called Mark Toyer who always does this. Whenever he looks at cameras, he always puts out there the raw, untouched rushes that he's captured. It's not kind of you can see that when you download these are the raw CRM files, so they're not edited or tweaked or graded and then exported as ProRes or anything like that. These are the original camera files. I think that's no more important than probably the 120p stuff. one of the biggest pleasures of using. Hi, I'm Ollie Kenchington from Corrie Films, and welcome to this first look at the newly announced Canon C300 Mark III. Discernible impact on image quality when you flick into that 120p mode. Although clearly there is some kind of additional compression ratio changes going on, because if you flick from 25p cinema raw light to 120 conform to 25p, the record time gets a lot longer. So clearly there is a shift in the compression ratio that's being used. But actually in terms of the look of the files, there don't seem to be any kind of penalty image quality wise, which is incredible achievement really. And I know you've obviously had a play with the camera as well, Jake, but I think you seem to have similar thoughts as me as to the quality in the 120 frames. It seems incredibly good and clean.
Yeah, we were really impressed with how the 120 looked. Slow motion is one thing that some cam manufacturers have struggled with. So yeah, to see it really, really well implemented into this is awesome to see. It's super clean.
It's quite good affirmation as well as something that Canon have always said. Certainly, I think publicly, but definitely if you speak to them at trade shows and speak to the Canon guys, they've always said that they would rather put a feature in one of their cameras once they know they can do it right than do it just for the sake of doing it or to capture headlines. And I've kind of bought into that. I'm very much have bought into that that messaging from Canon over the years. But I think this is one of the key things that's often been said to, why don't you have very high frame rates in these cinema EOS cameras, and Canon saying, well, look, we don't want to do it unless we can do it with our same high standard of image quality. That sounds good, but what's nice about the C300 Mark III is that absolutely takes that and demonstrates that they're not lying when they say that. This is some of the nicest, cleanest, best quality 120p I've seen, and the price of the camera is crazy, but when you look at the quality of it, they clearly have waited until they could do it justice, whether that was processing power or sensor or what, or probably a combination of all of those things. But they've absolutely stuck to their word, and they've put it in at a time when I felt that every time I flicked over into 120p, I wasn't setting myself up for a compromise. I wasn't going to have to kind of think, oh, this might now need noise reduction, or this might need a little bit of chroma noise reduction or something, where you do see those things creeping in on other a lot of other cameras when you flick into those high frame rate modes. So yeah, really, really reassuring to know that that is definitely not just something that they say. This is something that they live and breathe, which is great. It's really, I appreciate that personally. I agree. I'm the same kind of mindset. I'd rather do something once and do it well than promise people things before I know I can deliver them effectively and deliver them to the standard that I want to deliver them to. Shall I have a little browse through? I can flick over on the monitor, so you guys are seeing it's a little bit of a loop here. So I'm just showing you my camera feed through QuickTime at the moment. But if I flick over to Final Cut Pro, which is what I've edited and graded this first look in, I've got all of the rushes. There's 2.2 terabytes worth of rushes. So there's tons of stuff that didn't end up in the final 5-minute film. So I was going to kind of start to dive into some of that stuff. There's one shot in particular, actually, if I flick across now, there's one shot in particular which really shows off the dynamic range, which I ended up not using. In fact, there's a couple of them. There's this one, which I didn't use. I used a slightly different version of this one, but this is a hell of a shot to try and resolve detail in. And there's another one, if I can find it further back here. It's one of the files actually I've made available to download. And I think I put it in this slot, but maybe I didn't. There it is. So this is one of the shots that I've actually made available to download from the Dropbox link. So the original cinema raw light file for this, the .crm, is available in that download link, which will pop up in Discord at the end. But I just think that this is a crazy shot to be able to achieve. If I bring up my scopes at the same time, so this is, let me just double check. I think this is, I've got a slight grade on it at the moment, so let me just take that off. So this is the camera original. So this is there's no LUT on this. This is straight out of the camera. It won't even be applying a log 2 to Rec 709 like this is the ungamma adjusted image. And what's quite clear when you look at this shot under the scopes is the area of the frame that's clipped. So you can see the flat top here at the moment. If I place my marker on it, so we've got this flat top here. The area that is clipped is the sun. So you can see the edge here, it suddenly drops off. That's where this tree comes along. So you've got the sun here, and then that clipping's gone by the time you've got here. So although obviously there's clipping, I'm pointing it directly at the sun, the area that is clipped is actually a tiny portion of the frame, literally from here outwards. In all of these bright areas up here, all of this leaf detail, everything in the sky over here, all along the edge and the rim of the hill here, the rise that comes up, all of this has detail in it. You can see it all along here. And then if we look at the floor, so actually I'm going to zoom in on this. If I go to 100% and just move in. So this is obviously the darkest part of the frame here. If I just play through this, there's a very small, you can actually see it slightly in the scopes as you play through it. There's a very small amount of noise. That's absolutely to be expected. There's always going to be some noise particularly in an image like this. But what's quite crucial about this noise is it's the type of noise that you don't look at and kind of throw your hands up and go, oh, crikey, how am I going to deal with this? This is completely desaturated noise. So even if I go up to, let's go in sort of 200% here, you won't see any RGB patterning. There's no Bayer pattern noise here. If I play through it, it's all desaturated, which is very, very easy to clean up if you wanted to. But this is the thing, because it's desaturated, it doesn't even particularly look like digital noise. It's far more akin to, say, grain. And this is something that I've become quite familiar with even since the original C100 came out. This desaturated, sort of granular organic noise, a lot of people refer to it as, and although it's present, it's at a very manageable level. Oops, excuse me, dropping my phone. It's at a very manageable level, and certainly a lot less noisy than I would expect it to be. And this is an area, let's just go back to the full frame. Let's not forget this is an area. It's difficult to get a grasp of the scale, but this is a bridle path here. And then this from this level here up to the top here where you can see the sun creeping up, that's probably about 15 to 20 feet. It's a very deep gully that's out the side of, dug out the side here of like a slope. So these trees here, this texture of the bark, all of these roots down here, all the leaf litter and everything, all of this is completely in darkness. The sun was about, I'd say, 90 minutes or less from going down, and you can see the sun's just starting to clip and come over here, but the land kind of drops away here. So this area is very much in complete shadow. And this is the type of thing where you would normally expect a camera to either manage to keep it in, so either manage to kind of get a waveform like this, but this to be almost unusable in the levels of noise, or have clean areas here, but you would have had to have overexposed the image. So you would have ended up losing a lot more than just this small area of detail here. You know, going back a few years where I used to use a lot of a competing brand of camera, shall we say, where, you know, a shot like this, you would have to overexpose this because this wouldn't give you any usable detail in these shadow areas. It would be too noisy. So you would have to overexpose the camera by a good stop and a half, which, okay, yes, that would give me similar levels of usability in these shadow areas. But a shot like this is a really good example of how, if I'd been using the same cameras I was using in years gone by, it wouldn't have just been this small part of the sky immediately around the sun where this would have clipped. It would have been probably all of this area here. So all of this detail in the leaves and in the branches of the trees would be gone, and possibly even some more maybe out verging in this area. And one of the nice things about these trees at this time of year is the leaves, they're just starting to open up. They create these lovely sort of tapestry of like little green spots because the leaves aren't very big yet. So you get this kind of almost like stippled paint effect of the leaves and the trees. And it would be such a shame if, I'd kept this clean down here, but that would come at the expense of all of this lovely detail up in the tree canopy. So this is a very challenging shot, and similar to other challenging shots that I kind of pushed the camera into. There's shots like this one. This is the shot that made it into the final film. Again, this is graded. Let me just sorry. Let me bring this up here. So I've just quickly duplicated this from the original shot, and this should now have nothing on it. So this is the original shot. And again, if we look at the areas that are clipped, the sun is here in this shot. So the sun is just up. You can see the lens flare coming across there. So the sun is just out of the top of the frame. And there is a tiny amount of clipping, just a small amount in a few little speckled areas here. But again, pretty much absolutely everything else is in there. It's detailed. You can see the darkest thing is this tree down here. And if we zoom in on that, going to 100%. Here we go. Here's the tree here. Again, you can see no nasty color noise. There's a little bit, I say you can see with the compression over the internet, it's going to be pretty hard to see it, but just have to download the shots and have a look for yourself. This clip is also available to download, or a very similar clip is available to download. If I play through that at 200%, again, you can see there's a small amount of desaturated lumen noise, but being a raw signal, that's pretty much what I'd come to expect anyway. And if I'd done this with our C200, it would be more obvious as well, because you don't benefit from the DGO. Obviously, with the DGO, benefits of that are obviously unique to the C300 Mark III at the moment. So you are getting cleaner results in the raw, but there's lots of texture there. You can see plenty of detail in that tree. Whether or not I wanted it, I think in the final grade, I actually, if I come back to the other shot, the graded version of it, I think I pushed most of that down. You can just see the texture at the bottom, but certainly up where the ivy is, that's riding fairly low. That's right down sort of between 5 and 10 IRE in that area. So the choice being available to me is quite unique, particularly, as I say, coming from a C200, which is what we've been using for the last couple of years. To have a frame like this with such huge dynamic range and barely any of it lost, just a few pixels up around where the sun would be, is incredible. Jake, I know you did some. Well, it was Joe, wasn't it, who shot your review stuff? Well,
yeah.
What were your take homes from the dynamic range? It's a difficult thing. I think to my mind, there's two kind of approaches with claimed dynamic range with cameras. There's the stick it in a dynamic range chart and get up waveform monitors and count how many stops you're getting above noise floor and stuff. To my mind, I like to take it to places where I shoot regularly and know what normally happens with my camera, and that's why I went to this location in the woods. But what did you think? Because you were also in a kind of a rural location, I think, for your test shots, weren't you?
Yeah, so Joe took it out. Joe's actually here. You here, Joe? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, hey, Joe, how you doing?
Hey, I'm not too bad, thanks.
Good stuff. Well, yeah, I'll pose that question to you then. It seems like a really good way of testing dynamic range.
Yeah, I think like the same as you, when you're kind of pointing at the chart and looking at, maths and numbers, it's great, but it doesn't really line up to necessarily how you want to actually shoot and see how it works for you in a real world scenario. And I think, like you, obviously it was in my tests were in a rural kind of location. I think it does it is a nice way to test it, because you've got, again, all the kind of breaking of light through trees. You've got harsh shadows. Obviously, with the person as a subject, you can test how harsh lighting can behave on skin tone as well. And I think for me that is a much more useful method for testing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those. I think it's interesting you should mention that harshness of bright, extreme sunlight, particularly on light Caucasian skin, can really trip up a lot of cameras. And it's one of the things that I spotted with this with the C300 Mark III, that just it was very difficult to get it wrong. I love it when cameras come out that make our jobs easier. This is definitely one of those ones where you could be quite far off exposed, or in a really tricky high dynamic lighting situation, and not get back and look at your stuff and go, oh damn it, that skin that's got hit by the sun and it's blasted out.
It was a lot more forgiving than previous cameras I've tested, that's for sure.
And in that sense, I hate to make this comparison, because you hear it bandied around all the time, and it's also another manufacturer. So, but I can't kind of resist. From a colorist point of view, obviously I'm grading material from every single camera there is out there. I'm constantly getting rushes to grade from clients that have been shot with all kinds of stuff. And it's obvious that the Alexa is a big camera, particularly in the commercial space and features space. And so I end up grading an awful lot of stuff from Amiras and Alexas, and I was grading some stuff last week that was shot by B&Q, believe it or not, who have an Arri Alexa Mini LF, which is insane. But I was grading some stuff for them that had been shot on the Mini LF, and I get a similar feeling when I was working with the C300 Mark III material as I do when I work with kind of Amira and Alexa stuff. It's that, and I guess maybe the thing they share in common is this DGO technique. I wonder if it's just that, but it feels like when harsh light is hitting something that's highly reflective, or you're pointing the camera at the sun, the way that the image is transitioning into those areas is far more forgiving and far more it just makes your life so much easier when you're grading this stuff. It's really beautiful to work with, and as I say, not something that I've really seen on other cameras to such a close kind of comparison. I think I've got somewhere around here some stuff. Let's see if I can find it. So I filmed some stuff. None of this actually made it. Here we go. This is one of the stuff. So none of this stuff actually made it into the into my final review, but it is some of the stuff that I noticed. So here we've got. I was filming my daughter making a rhubarb crumble. I think the shot of her harvesting the rhubarb made it into the final film, but this is one of the shots where she was actually making the crumble. She's got very fair skin, very, very fair skin. And normally I find if I'm filming her, particularly in direct sunlight like this, then you can see on her knuckles here, on the back of her forearm here, and on her fingers here, where the sun is directly on it. This is the type of thing where other cameras would definitely end up with some nasty clipping, or if not clipping, then highly saturated areas. So you'd end up with quite normally highly saturated yellows or reds. So you might end up with, say, the knuckles here or the underside of her finger being overly saturated. And I think this is one of the areas where you see the dual gain output, where it's separately amplifying the highlight areas and high saturation areas compared to the amplification that's going on with the low noise areas. It's doing those two things, amplifying those two areas of the signal separately, one doing the job better than the other could do it, and then recombining them before it carries on down the pipeline. And this is one of those shots where you see that benefit. And it could be, a lot of the marketing material around the C300 Mark III refers to the ability to create higher dynamic range images, and I've become slightly conditioned over the years to be almost scared off of claims of high dynamic range. If we cast our minds not too far back to the fad in stills with high dynamic range and these very unnatural looking images. What's striking about what's happening here with the C300 Mark III's new sensor with the DGO is it's actually creating exactly what it says it's going to do, which is a high dynamic range image, but in a completely normal and naturalistic way. There's nothing about this that looks unnatural or like it's, areas of brightness don't sit nicely with areas of shadow, which they're side by side here. So it's a particularly challenging shot to do that with. It doesn't look unnatural. It looks quite the opposite. It looks exactly how it looks with the eye. And when you come to grade shots like this, it does work really well. If I come in and just bring back some of these areas, if I bring this down, bring down these areas here, just whack up the saturation, you can see that it feels natural. It doesn't look wrong in any particular way, which, as I say, is something that I would be slightly concerned about if I hadn't seen the results with my own hands. Even if I start to really separate out those highlight areas from those shadow areas, that you don't get that point where it feels like it's trying to do too much, if that makes sense. There we go. So that sort of area, we've got specular highlights here. We've got pings of metal, areas over this area. And again, if we look at the original image, there's nothing clipping. When shooting raw, my general rule of thumb is just to get it as bright as I can in the waveform without anything clipping. But that's very tricky when you've got glass, when you've got metal. There's the sieve, there's the enamel bowl over here, there's a metal grater here, and skin and wood, which is quite low reflectivity. It's very tricky to kind of keep that all in normally. And you can see this very clearly from the waveform monitor, that it's all in, it's all there. And once it's graded, you've obviously got a much more natural and naturalistic looking image come the end of it, which is fantastic. Joe, what did you think about the dual gain output? I mean, were there any shots that you found that you didn't feel like there was a benefit, or did you seem to notice it in all cases?
I feel like, I think the places I noticed it the most were there's a few shots where I was shooting with my girlfriend Kathleen, and again, she also has very, very pale skin. I think that's her Irish heritage, but she's so I actually quite intentionally a lot of times avoided kind of shooting directly into her face, and it's obviously more flattering anyway. We got more of a soft bounce, but in return, you're getting these really kind of harsh speculars going down her hair and everything. And I feel like obviously hair still having a lot of detail, and it still managed to kind of hold that detail rather than just merging into one block of white. I feel like those shots were most where I was noticing it. I mean, in the trees, obviously, you will see your highlights kind of go brighter, but I feel like the highlights don't have detail within them because it's going from tree to just white or just sky, whereas in hair it's a highlight, but there's lots of fine details within that highlight, and I feel like that kind of was a place where I got to kind of see how much detail it's still retaining in the highlights.
Yes, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Hair is very tricky, actually. In some ways, trickier than skin, in particular if it's light hair. I think one of the shots that was in the see if I can find my final. See, you can see how many rough edits I took to do it now. Bring this across. Only 11 rough edits. Come on. Where's my first? So if we come into stuff of her. Yeah, there we go. So this shot's another one that really stands out because I'm transitioning. So first of all, this is handheld. I know it's slow motion, which is obviously making it's a bit more forgiving of the. Oh, there we go. That's me talking. I know obviously it's slow motion, which makes it more forgiving. But there's I think I'm right in saying, yeah. So you can see there's no image stabilization on this shot at all. That's the ungraded image. So I've literally just got a color board on there, just pushing up the saturation and some curves for the contrast. That's all I've done. There's no image stabilization on this at all, and it's handheld, and it's a really nice amount of kind of smooth motions. This also shows off the image stabilization as well. But what I love about this shot is by the time I'm underneath these massive, very broad rhubarb leaves, which are kind of cutting out all the light really from the sun, you've still got loads of detail down in the soil. There was, hardly any grading. You can see the corrections I've applied there, and there's so much color there. The beautiful bright pink of the stems of the rhubarb, the vivid green of the leaves. There's loads and loads of beautiful color information in there. At no point have I had to apply noise reduction, and the way it handles transitioning from the bright sunshine hitting the cap here. This is a light cream cap. The tops of the leaves here. It's managed to handle in one shot, in one move, going from this very high, brightly lit scene to this very dark underside. And I think that was probably one of the most exciting shots that I got. The fact that I was able to transition in one shot from here to here, it's a great way of telling the story. In a way that I probably didn't think actually that I'd be able to do. I actually tried this after I had done a few shots and thought, do you know what? I think I can get away with actually moving straight in here. So initially in the first few takes, I was just filming from up here, and then I cut into to these close-ups, which is typically what you would want to do. But it was only at this point that I gave it a go that I realized that I could actually transition in one move and tell that story in a slightly different way without having to compromise at all. That I thought, this is again one of those moments where the 16 stops or more of dynamic range are actually they're actually making me be able to change the way that I'm shooting and using shots that I wouldn't normally be able to do. I know it's not particularly exciting compared to features or commercials, and it's just me messing around in the garden, but it's quite a exciting thing to be able to transition in one shot from such a bright area to such a dimly lit area and not actually have to do anything more than just whack a couple of simple effects on there. You go. If we go to the ungraded image again, if we zoom in, you can see it's really clean. All of these dark areas, there's nothing that's too much of a problem. Even right in here, this is at 200% now. And if we go back to here, again, the tops, these are all areas that you would typically be quite concerned about losing, these highlights on the top of a light colored hat, for example. I did think that I forgot she had the hat on. That's why I went to this shot, because I was going to talk about the fact she had blonde hair. But obviously, I've forgotten that she had a hat on in that shot. These shots are really nice. There's actually very little light getting down to that. That's right in the middle of this plant. So there's very little light in there, but it just all works really nicely.
There was a shot
Again, this is another one of those shots where the sun really brightly backlit. So the sun hitting her fingers here and hitting and coming through the metallic colander. And again, there's no... another thing I should point out, I didn't use... There were a few times I attempted to use a reflector, but it was basically impossible because I was just on my own. So I couldn't really use a reflector for any of this. So when you're seeing shots like this and shots like this, that there's no bounce. This is all, shadow side of these objects, and this is just detail that it's managed to contain all within that one image. So it's a hell of an achievement, really.
There was a shot that I managed to get of Kathleen when she was walking.
How about if I flip back? Let's flip back here. Another thing that I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit was the speed of the camera. I did mention it in my review, but I think it's worth picking up again. Jake and Joe, did you also notice just how damn fast this camera is to actually turn on and get through the menus?
Extremely. I mean,
are you there? Oh, hang on, I think I might have muted you. Sorry.
I think you are. I think you may have muted us, Ollie. Can you hear us? I can, yeah.
Yeah. Did you find the camera was really quick?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, they've never been. I mean, compared to some manufacturers, they've never been that slow to turn on anyway. But yeah, there's definitely improvement. Definitely when you're kind of navigating through the menu and changing some kind of key recording settings, it's everything just changes up a lot quicker. And just even turning between like slow and fast mode, it made solo shooting, especially when you're not really shooting things that are rehearsed and you're kind of trying to record on the fly and capture natural moments as they unfold. It was very, very beneficial to have that speed.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's something that hang on, I think my TV's turned off. Been on for so long. Sorry, let me just turn the telly back on. There we go. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, it's not particularly sexy to kind of put in a marketing bump, but it is quite important. I first noticed it with the C500 Mark II because that is also very, very fast. But I don't know what it was about this. Maybe it's because of the, you know, as you say, solo shooting with it under, you know, quite challenging conditions, trying to capture so much stuff and simultaneously kind of rein in my children and my dog. There was a lot to juggle, and it was literally just me and the camera and you know, walking through the woods and trying to capture this stuff at the same time. So maybe it just kind of brought it into sharp focus for me. But you know, initializing the media and doing black balances and turning it on and off, they're all things that, you know, I'm used to waiting quite a bit longer. You know, as you say, other Canon cameras aren't slow, but these things were happening almost instantaneously. And I think I got through 7 mags on the 4 days that I was shooting with this. I just kept shooting. It was a 512 gig card as well. I just kept shooting and shooting and shooting, and you know, initializing the cards and turning the camera on and off. Yeah, I was ready and able to shoot very quickly, which for a camera that I think is going to be a very attractive proposition for people who are working in sort of ENG and broadcast and maybe news and other things like that, and solo shooters and you know, maybe even events, because of the high frame rates. It could be really cool for shooting like event promos and festival films. And I think this could be a huge advantage, the fact that you can work with it so quickly and so flexibly.
Yeah, I think that plus on top of the, you know, the general design changes that they've made with the 500 and this new 300 Mark III on, like, over the Mark IIs and the C200s. I think overall it's a better design and is better suited for, like you say, for ENG and broadcast and, you know, solo guys that just want it on their shoulder. The only downside obviously being the audio controls for those kind of operators, but that's something, you know, every camera has compromise, so it's just whatever compromise is most it's most you know, it means the most to you. But I mean, the sensor at the price point is crazy. And I mean, you've explained it really well in terms of how the actual footage looks and how it is to manipulate. But yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that, I mean, Joe, when Joe shot with it the first time, I remember him saying, like, this, wow, like, this is really good. And then when we learned about the price of it as well, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's you know, this is how technology works. I guess, you know, better stuff gets cheaper, but this is better than stuff that's more expensive than it. So it's it's a weird position to be in.
It's going to sound weird to say, but I mean, we obviously, you and I, Jake, we test cameras every week. New cameras always coming through our doors, but it feels weird to say that actually this was the first time for quite a while I felt addicted to using this camera. Like, I was genuinely just curious to see what else it could do and how else the next image or scene could handle, how well the camera could handle the next scene or the lighting, and I felt generally curious, and I felt like I was genuinely exploring something new, which relatively it's not, but I guess maybe in Canon terms I don't know, but it felt very exciting for me, and I don't know why.
I mean, I think you're right, Joe. It feels like that. It feels like that's a massive overstatement, and I think anyone who hasn't, obviously, most people haven't used the camera, or if they haven't seen the stuff that's been captured with it, it would be easy to assume that that's an overstatement. But you're absolutely right, and I think that discrepancy between reading on a piece of paper, oh, DGO, what's that? Oh, it gives me an extra stop. Okay, and then actually, as we've just demonstrated with fair skin and direct sunlight and strongly backlit scenes and all of these different shoot situations, where actually that it's not just an extra stop, it's a whole new approach to containing both high saturation and high dynamic range scenes. That does, you're absolutely right, it does. I had the same feeling of like, wow, I'd love to try and shoot that. Or if I could reshoot that project I did last year with that other camera, that would be amazing to see how this could have handled that. Particularly from a lighting point of view, the opportunity to be far more pared down. And I think that's where I see this being very exciting as a documentary camera, because you really can get away with less lighting, with less sort of care to set up a scene in terms of managing the scene's dynamic range. It's far more forgiving, as I just showed you with that rhubarb shot. Where you come down from the bright sky and highlights down into underneath. That's the type of shot that if you were doing some kind of documentary shoot where you just wanted to grab something and you didn't have time to bring in a reflector, or you didn't have time to orientate your subject to get the sun in just the right position, you've got more usable shots. And I completely agree. I also had that feeling of wanting to go and shoot more after I'd used the camera, and I don't know why. I didn't necessarily feel that after I tried out the C500 Mark II. For me, when I was using the C500 Mark II, it was exciting because it was a whole new form factor then, and we hadn't seen that before in a Canon camera. And the sensor, the full frame sensor, was lovely to work with, particularly on larger scale, landscape stuff with the lenses. But I think the opportunities that a full frame sensor and the 6K recording afford you are the types of things that lend themselves more to set up pieces, more commercial or feature style work, where you can really get the most out of that increased resolution, that increased detail, and the depth of field that obviously you get with that full frame sensor. But because that's not my world, we don't really, as a business, operate in that world. I think the C300 Mark III is therefore more exciting to someone like me, and the S35. It was funny. I was watching your live stream when the cameras first announced. You had Nino and Philip Bloom and Gunther were there. I think Philip said, his first instincts were he kind of felt like he was over S35. And for me, I don't really feel that way at all. In fact, it's not something that even really occurred to me. I'm still very much in that S35 world in terms of the lenses that I have. And I think when you look at the higher frame rates and the increased sort of flexibility of the way that it's handling the dynamic range of scenes and what the opportunities that unlocks, I think it's a very exciting camera. And literally the last thing that I thought of the whole time I was shooting with it was, oh, it's an S35 sensor. In no way did that even creep into my brain, to be honest. I don't know how you feel about that, Joe, but
I feel like my attitude towards Super 35 and full frame's kind of gone almost reversed, because my first, I guess, shooting video was from back in the 5D days. So I was from the beginning very used to and very, I guess, biased towards full frame. And then I started getting obviously more introduced to Super 35, and I thought, I don't really like Super 35. It's such a small sensor. And then gradually all you shoot is Super 35, and now full frame's kind of been reintroduced to a higher videography level. And it's just, I'm now more comfortable to Super 35 than I am full frame. And it was such the reverse when I started off.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it was the last thing I was thinking about was this is Super 35. You don't feel at all compromised by that. It doesn't
No,
feel like it's a compromise.
no, I don't. I don't. I guess it depends on what you're doing. I mean, I know in Philip's case, he's been shooting full frame for a little while now with other cameras. So I think particularly when you factor in your lens ecosystem, I think anyone that's there right now that's already operating in an EF ecosystem with the Holy Trinity, 1635, 2470, 7200, those high quality flexible sort of utility zooms. I can't imagine there'd be any situations, or very few situations, where you'd be feeling like that S35 was restricting you in any way. And probably actually, if those are the types of lenses you have and you don't have any if you've not really used with sort of full frame coverage cine lenses or anything like that, I should imagine that you would be more comfortable actually with this S35 sensor than if someone put a full frame sensor in your hands. But I guess it just depends what kind of work you have been doing or will be doing in the future. But I do feel like the C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark III have very separate use cases, very separate things that they do very well. And as I said, if you're looking for very high quality, detailed 6K RAW full frame, which is the type of thing that I should imagine people who are shooting high quality TV and features, and think of that more as like a cheaper C700 full frame. I think then that C500 Mark II is a fantastically priced camera. If you're coming more from the other side and you're looking for maybe a high quality, flexible broadcast, commercial, corporate world, and you're in that S35 sort of still zoom lens kind of area like I am, then I think the price point and the features of this camera make it incredibly compelling for that area of the market as well.
Yeah, I can see it from both perspectives. I know operators who have shot full frame, the operators who have shot Super 35 for years. Fantastic camera operators that have made beautiful looking imagery on Super 35. They've gone to full frame and gone, oh my god, this is amazing, because from their point of view, they're not like me and Joe. I'm the same as Joe. Like, again, I grew up shooting on DSLRs, used to the larger formats, and then worked backwards back down to Super 35. So it's like these guys, they've seen the advantages of full frame, and I think that's the only set of people that may struggle going back to Super 35. Like Philip said, like there's a certain it changes the way you shoot, having that different field of view difference, and I think that's what people are more so hunting for, rather than it just being full frame. They just like these wider field of views, more shadow depth of fields, and all of the manipulations you can do with perspective, everything else of having these larger sensors. But for a huge amount of there's a huge market of people who want a camera, don't care if it's full frame or Super 35, they just want a fully featured camera with the best sensor they can get. And realistically, for less than, honestly, for like less than 15 grand, maybe less than 10 grand, 12 grand, this camera is a no-brainer. There's nothing else really in it if pure image quality is what's driving your camera purchase. But that's the thing, like when you buy a camera, everything is compromised. And I tell customers all the time when they're making a decision, they're not just going to be looking at one camera, you're going to be looking at a few. And the best thing to do is to make a checklist for each one, and then make a pros and cons list in terms of what's a pro of this camera, what's a con, and then you can weigh up each camera, and then you can choose based on that what camera is designed for you. Because these discussions of what camera is perfect and what camera is going to work for one person might not work for the other. So, but yeah, I mean, the sensor, the form factor, everything that Canon have done with this camera at the price point it's at is insane. And it's awesome. It's awesome in two ways. It's awesome for people who want to spend around this much on a camera and have it fully featured because it's here. And then it's awesome because now the C300 Mark II, which is still excellent, is going to be even cheaper, which means a whole new market of people probably on mirrorless cameras are going to be able to scoop these up nice and cheap. And that camera is still great. Still has an amazing image quality. Looking at the amount of documentaries that are shot on that sensor, it's insane. So it's Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, the price drops to C200 as well, I think, will
Yeah,
also be
that as well.
because the C200 is the cheapest route into shooting RAW, without internal RAW on these Canon cameras, and that was a big step up for us when we got the C200 a couple of years ago, and it's nice to think that's also bringing that price point down, making that all more accessible. I think more people that shoot with cinema raw light, the more people will realize just how flexible it is as a codec. This whole thing. I've got a Mac Pro, one of the new Mac Pros, but I had all of this footage on a fast external hard drive because I was flip flopping between editing it here in my studio and editing at home. So actually, I was going back and forth between editing it with my Mac Pro in the studio and editing it with my MacBook Pro at home. And Cinema Raw Lite is an incredibly high quality, flexible codec. I think the word raw sometimes kind of puts people immediately on the back foot. Oh, I can't handle a raw workflow with my setup. But if you literally forget the word raw and just think of it as just a high quality full RGB 444 codec, it feels and edits on the timeline just like that. Whether I'm doing it in Final Cut or I'm doing it in Resolve, I never create proxies. Even when I was on the laptop, I'm just skimming through, cutting, working with it in the native full quality cinema raw light files on the timeline, grading them there and then. In real time, it's a very lightweight codec, and I think if the price points of these cinema raw light capable cameras like the C200 and up now, if there's downward pressure on that, I think it's an exciting opportunity for people to kind of get into that as a codec and get used to working with it. Yeah, obviously there are cost obstacles in terms of the cost of cards and the associated sort of archive and RAID and fast drive costs that come with that. But I think probably I'm similar to most people, and every couple of years I look at what RAIDs we've got, what hard drives we've got for working with and backing up, and the speed of communicating with those, and that goes down to sort of the media that's being used on our cameras and upgrade if I need to. So the cost is constantly coming down, the speed's going up, the capacities are going up, and if people are still working with similar kind of hard drives and sort of workflow and pipeline in their post-production that they've been maybe doing for 2, 3, 4 years, probably now is a good time to look at upgrading that, getting bigger and faster drives, and working with these higher quality codecs, because they unlock a huge amount of potential, a huge amount of quality in terms of grading the images. That's fantastic, and certainly helped us a great deal with some of the commercial work that we've done, where we've needed 100% color information. We haven't wanted to be able to kind of make any compromises in terms of color in the signal, whether that's packaging for a brand, pack shots, or brand colors that are in the video, or just a very creative look that a client wants to achieve. The cinema raw light unlocks that. And the additional thing that occurred to me with the C300 Mark III is that this isn't something that we do, but I know there are corporate businesses out there that make a lot of money, and commercial companies that are making a lot of money from high frame rate product imagery and doing that often against green screen. The fact that you can capture 120 frames 444 cinema raw light is perfect for anyone doing high frame rate green screen work. I mean, that's the type of stuff actually that normally one has to invest in quite a lot more expensive equipment in order to get something that would give you something that's easy to go on and work with that chroma key afterwards, that's got all the color information that you need in it, and those higher frame rates. It's that's I think there'll be a lot of people that work in those areas that will be very excited about this camera.
Yeah, no, totally agree. We've got a few questions I think we can have a look at. So I'd love to hear what he thinks of the C300 Mark III compared to the 500 Mark II. Is the dynamic range of the C300 better? I think we've kind of covered that a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, well, I mean, I haven't qualified it, but the dynamic range of the C300 is on paper a stop better, I believe. So it's 15 plus stops on the C500 Mark II, whereas we're getting 16 plus stops on this.
Yeah.
As I said, although typically from a color point of view, because I'm a colorist, I do really like drill down and like to shoot charts from that point of view. And I've captured a load of daylight charts with the X-Rite color checker, which are in the Dropbox link that we'll share at the end for people to download and look at. But when it comes to dynamic range, I'm the opposite. I prefer to just kind of go with anecdotal kind of what I've done before in similar locations, what and what I can see on just the scopes at the end. From working with both those cameras, I think it's appreciable the increased dynamic range with the C300 Mark III. Not so much in the fact that, well, you've got an extra stop. An extra stop is still a huge amount. That's a doubling of information. So that's still a huge thing. But actually, it's more about what we were talking about earlier with the fact that it's treating those high brightness, high saturation areas in such a more forgiving and detailed way. That's really the bigger thing, I think, for me. Do you use any filters while shooting against the sun? I was talking to once, and they said that I should avoid shooting towards the sun. I probably should do, but I wasn't. I literally just had the camera and just the built-in NDs that I was using for filtering. All right. No, this one's going. How does it compare to ARRI? Well, I think I covered that. It's one of the closest types of images from probably, except maybe the C700. It's probably one of the closest ones in terms of feeling the ways with grading and detail in highlights. I think that just comes down to the DGO. The ARRIs have been using that dual gain technique ever since the introduction of the ALEV sensor. So I think it's not surprising that it feels very like that. It seems similar. I've said it before about other cameras, and I know a lot of C200 owners originally grabbed them as cheap B cams to reds because of the internal raw recording. I can imagine that there'll be a lot of people that will be pairing the C300 Mark III on bigger productions, maybe as B cams with like I said, mini LFs and other cameras, which is, it's just conjecture at the moment, but I do feel like those images feel very similar to work with from a post point of view. Which lenses did I shoot on? Carl, I will try and remember all of them, but I do know that I jotted down all of them in the description on the Vimeo link that we're going to provide for the review film. So if you look in the description there, it's got the complete breakdown of all the lenses. From memory, it was the 1635 f2.8L. It was the 7200 Mark III, the f2.8, and there's the 100mm macro that I've used for some of the macro shots in there as well. But I've got everything that I used listed and the full spec on that Vimeo link that we'll provide you in a moment. Any other questions? I can't see any other questions. Oh, here we go. Here's one. When using a viewfinder, how practical, fast is it to use the joystick to control autofocus? I know several people that use the joysticks and you can customize how quickly it moves. I prefer to use the touch autofocus. So this whole shoot, I was just using the LCD that comes with the camera, and was just using the on-screen touch controls for focus. The autofocus still works when you're in 120p, which is fantastic. You lose face tracking and object tracking, but you don't lose the dual pixel autofocus altogether. And so there's a number of times where I was using the just the touch autofocus to control the autofocus. I've been using obviously Canons for a number of years now, so I'm very used now to that autofocus and using that, literally kind of moving the camera and shifting the autofocus at the same time. So I've kind of got that new way of working down pat now. But yeah, for me personally, I find it too slow to use the joystick, but you can adjust it, and I do know people that do use it that way. Were there any restrictions? For example, magnification whilst recording. Yeah, the magnification doesn't work in 120p. Can't remember if it worked in 60p. I think it did. Can you guys remember?
I can't.
I'm afraid I don't remember. I'm afraid.
No, I just remember. I do remember at one point it saying it couldn't do it, and that was when I went into 120p. But I don't remember it happening on any other occasions. The other big restriction, if you want to call it that, Carl, is that the DGO only works when you're at 60p and under. Although I still found that above 60p, when I was shooting shots that were in 120 frames, I still found that they weren't. It wasn't like suddenly, oh, it was miles away. And I'd actually, that was one of my biggest kind of queries, was the DGO is measurably improving the image 60p and down, but if it's off entirely from 60p and up, how come the image still looks so damn good? I don't know if you've thought the same thing, Joe.
Sorry, say that last bit again.
Well, the DGO is turned off, is disabled when you're shooting above 60 frames.
Yeah.
But what I couldn't wrap my head around was it was so clear to me the benefits of the DGO when it was activated at 60 frames and under. But what wasn't so obvious to me is how they were still achieving such a good image.
Yeah.
Above that, when in theory it was switched off.
I remember, I think the first day I was shooting, because I had it for a few days, and the first day I didn't actually know that it was beyond 60 that it was turned off.
Right.
And so obviously I'd shot a variety of 25p and 120p, and yeah, there was no obvious distinction that something had changed.
Yeah.
And actually there's one shot of a sunset on the first day where obviously you got real bright sun and obviously the highlights on the clouds, and I did that shot twice, not to compare, but twice, once in 25p and once in 120p, and you kind of look at it and you actually, it's in the 120p, you don't see too much of a difference really. Even though DGO's off, it still retains a really nice highlight.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if maybe, I mean, I mainly shot RAW, so I don't know about you, but I wonder if potentially that's going to be more noticeable if you're shooting an XF-AVC.
Potentially, yeah. All of my stuff was RAW. I think the only non-RAW stuff I did was high frame rate tests.
I mean, that was something that stood out to me to the camera is when I was shooting with the C500 Mark II, I had the same media, I had the same size capacity, I had similar length of time with it. But I innately still found myself through my kind of, muscle memory from using the C200 that I wanted to just shoot what I needed to RAW and then kind of get it back into the compressed codecs and into XF-AVC as quickly as possible. I don't know what it was about the C300 Mark III. Maybe it's the fact that the high frame rate still worked in RAW, but I didn't find myself wanting, having that urge to get out of RAW as quickly as possible to conserve media like I have with other cameras. That's partly why I ended up coming away with well over 2 terabytes of stuff to go through. But I don't know what it was about that, but I definitely found myself more comfortable just staying in RAW than I have done with other cinema RAW-like cameras.
Yeah, I felt myself more concerned with running out of battery than running out of media space.
Yeah, I seem to be charging batteries a lot. I think coming from the C200, which is so conservative on, it's not very power hungry at all, that camera. Coming from that camera to this one, it seems, wow, you're using a lot more power. But it's definitely an improvement over the C500 Mark II. That really was drinking the batteries compared to my C200. There's definitely been an improvement, I think, with the power management and the handling of that draw with the C300 Mark III. But I think if you are used to using, cameras that don't have quite so many demands in terms of high frame rates and the dual gain and all those other things which are going on in this camera, I do think that it could potentially be a bit of a shock. Those batteries. The only thing I would say is that obviously the V-Lock expansion pack on the back makes it much easier and quicker to just whack on bigger batteries if you're sort of on sticks in a studio environment and you have to be running on power. Also, the fact that the body compared to the C200, which has the smaller mini XLR connection, on the C300 Mark III, you've got the normal full-size XLR power input, which is a far more standardized connector. So there was one point where I had the expansion pack was back at home and I was out just with my normal kit bag, and I needed to whack on a bigger battery, and I always have a DTAP to XLR cable as part of my kit bag. It's been there for years, and I just strapped the V-lock to my tripod with just a bungee cord and just ran this DTAP to XLR cable into the camera. So having more standardized inputs on the camera helps a great deal as well for that. But the power usage is obviously different to the other ones.
I'm not sure how much XFABC stuff you shot, because I didn't shoot much, so I'm not sure if I can really comment or make an observation. But one thing I did notice, so I shot a video for a coffee company a few years ago, and shot it with the C200 in cinema raw light, and I think it was a few months later I had to go back to C300, and obviously that had to be XFABC. And I felt when trying to match that to the raw, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like how, I mean, sure I could have spent more time and really matched it very nicely, but I felt it's a shame that I wasn't shooting in RAW because I wasn't liking how it was performing compared to the C200 RAW. But in the case of the C300, when I shot the high frame rate test, I did a run in RAW and then a run in XFABC, and I found it very easy and very satisfying to match the XFABC to the RAW look, basically the colors and the tone it was reproducing.
No, I 100% agree. I think there's been actually some quite big tweaks under the hood. This is not based on anything that I've been told by any engineers, but from the tests that I've done with the camera, I found the same, that I could flick between the RAW and XFABC, and it literally made no difference whatsoever. The way that it felt and responded in terms of color and latitude felt almost identical. And there's another couple of big things that's on a related tangent. Was first of all, when you're going into wide DR on the C300 Mark III, it's actually just changing the gamma. And I don't know if you've noticed this before, but it irks me about the C200. When you go from standard BT709 to wide DR on the C200, it claims, the menu would have you believe that it's just tweaking the gamma. You're just going from a BT1886 to the wide DR curve, but you can see the colors change. You can see that it is shifting. The gamut's shifting. There's a change there with the colors. And what's really nice with the C300 Mark III is it isn't doing that. In fact, I've done some tests, some charts, which are available to download as well. And you can see there's a BT709 with a 709 gamma. And then I flick into the BT709 wide DR, and the colors don't shift at all. So it is now, and this was the same with the C500 Mark II. So both those cameras now, it is only a purely gamma shift, gamma adjustment that's taking place when you go into wide DR. Another thing to note is that the BT709 preset, which is in CP1 in this camera, unless you drill down into it and go to edit it and look, it's not obvious that it is actually wide DR. I do like to have a BT709 with a 709 curve, standard curve as they refer to it in the 200, as an option, and that isn't one of the preset options. But so I created a custom one that was without the wide DR, with just the standard BT709, just because I find that quite useful for basing our exposure when we're exposing some of our shots with a 90% reflectance card, because it lines up with 90 IRE when you're in standard, but that drops to 75 IRE in wide DR. So it's nice to have the extra option in the menu, but I had to create that one from scratch. But there's a few changes to do with the way that the gamuts are being handled, that both in terms of switching between RAW and XFABC, but even just switching between, as I say, BT709 and wide DR, that are definitely improvements with the camera, make it much easier to work with. And lastly, on this point, another thing I noticed was, and I think you can do this with the C200, but it didn't seem to be, I don't think it's as easy. I think you have to create a custom picture for it, is the fact that in RAW that I could assign it a BT709 gamut. that was really useful. Obviously, I can change it because it's raw anyway, but it was really useful to be able to shoot some of the 120p cinema raw light stuff with actually a log 2 or a log 3 gamma, but with BT709 gamut, which I know you might think, well, why would you want to do that? Because you've got all that color information there. But in terms of then grading it with other stuff that you might be shooting in, say, XFAVC with the smaller gamut, did make it much quicker to do that, because I didn't have to push it to that same starting gamut as I would have done if I had just been shooting with the cinema raw light pre-assigned. As I say, it's raw, so you can change it anyway, but just making that choice in camera was much quicker and actually quite convenient, I found.
Media, can you hear us in Discord? Because so Media from Canon's in the Discord, and I have a question. I wasn't sure. Okay. You might remember, Ollie. So it was a question about autofocus and high frame rate. So obviously one of the big appeals is that it can do it in 1:120, but it's limited to no face tracking. Yeah. But Joe, from when Joe shot with the camera, he thinks from what he remembers that in 180 frames a second 2K there's no autofocus. Did you shoot any in that or not?
I didn't. No, I didn't. Do you want me to just double check? I've got the camera right here.
Have you got the camera with you?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Media, you right?
Yes. No AF over 120.
Okay.
Oh, right. Okay.
Didn't think I was going crazy.
Okay, fine. So you don't need me to check. Yeah. Well, that stands to reason. That kind of makes sense, I guess. But yeah. So yeah, again, I've heard some people sort of bemoaning the 180 isn't available in S35. I don't know. I feel like you kind of people are constantly trying to like have their cake and eat it. I don't know. I think there's always got to be compromises somewhere. I definitely don't buy into this thing that Canon do it deliberately just to annoy people. There's got to be a good engineering reason why the 180 is only available in the S16 mode. But I kind of feel like that once you're getting into that ballpark, I mean, the difference between 120 and 180, there would have to be a very specific use case for that to be really like, damn it, I need those extra 60 frames per second. And then not be satisfied with the crop or not have the lens choices to be able to actually, mitigate that crop. But I don't know. I'm sure there's always going to be someone that's going to be in that situation, I suppose. But for me, it's like, I'm just excited that I've got 120 frames. I'm not too concerned that I haven't got this, that, or the other in 180.
No, totally. And Media as well. Joe, the slow-mo stuff, that all has audio. It captures audio at 120 and 180 as well, doesn't it?
It doesn't, I don't think.
It doesn't?
No, not as far as I know, no.
Oh, so no audio at all, like anything above 60?
No. I mean, Ollie, you've shot 120, haven't you?
Yeah, there's definitely no audio at that level.
Okay.
I can't remember if there's audio at 60, but there must be.
No, I think up to 60, but I don't think anything above 60.
No, there's definitely no audio above 60.
Yeah.
No. Because someone asked me this actually the other day, and I actually double checked on the camera, and all of the audio settings get grayed out as soon as you're in those plus 60 frame rates.
Okay.
Which again, that person who asked me that was like, oh, it's a shame because apparently that did work in another camera that I used, and they thought that was a shame. Again, there's always going to be specific use cases where that might be a problem, but
yeah, all
of the audio that's in mine is all just stuff I picked up separately and just mixed in as just ambience that I went out and recorded separately. But,
yeah, people just have to get used to doing that.
It's more convenient to be able to capture that at the same time.
Yeah, even if like they did it the same way like Blackmagic do, for example, where you capture obviously the slow mo and then you just have a separate file for audio. Even that I think would be awesome. Something to add.
It would be useful, and one would imagine. I mean, I hate saying things like this because it seems that people constantly say this, but one would imagine that could be something that could be done. I mean, because in terms of bandwidth, obviously it's relatively small. But I've been in that situation before where people have said, well, surely they can do this because they do that. And, it's, I'm very happy with what I've got, but I appreciate that there might be some people that might, desperately need that, that separate audio at higher frame rates, maybe.
Awesome. Well, I mean,
Oh,
yeah,
there's another question that I missed. Sorry, what's it like shooting with the electronic IS? I didn't do much of it this particular time, or not sort of not deliberately. But it's the same electronic image stabilization that's in the C500 Mark II, which I did do an awful lot of testing with. I shot all handheld around Bath Christmas Market back in December with the C500 Mark II, testing out its electronic IS. It's incredible. I absolutely love it. I'm very used to shooting handheld. I really enjoy shooting handheld, and I don't mean sort of like with ready rigs and gimbals. I mean literally just taking the bare camera, top handle, and that's it. I really enjoy doing it, and I'm very used to kind of moving my body to kind of introduce a little bit of parallax and stuff, and that's just a way that I like to capture things. So the electronic IS for me is great because I'm not trying to walk with the camera and go, oh, it's nowhere near as good as a gimbal, and I'm not trying to kind of do fake cranes and stuff. I'm just just holding it, a little bit of movement. I think it works really well with. I'll be interested to see what it's like with the R5 when that comes out, because that seems to obviously be a whole new system of IBIS that they're introducing there. So I'd love to do some comparisons with that and see what's going on there. But in terms of electronic image stabilization, I think it's really good. I think it can go wrong. Like all electronic stabilization, it can get quite jellyish in the background. At the end of my review, there's a shot. It's like a close-up of some gauze, and I'm just moving the camera. That's all handheld with the electronic IS turned off, because I did originally shoot with the electronic image stabilization turned on, and because of the distance between the focal plane and the background, which was like a mile, the background and the hills were warping quite badly, and I was on a slope, so I couldn't really keep my arms very steady. So I turned it off for that shot and just captured it at 50p and then conformed it to 25 to kind of get that smoothness. And I think I had to put a bit of stabilization on that in Final Cut. But generally, I find the electronic image stabilization is really, really good, actually.
Awesome. You've got a little screensaver, by the way.
Sorry.
It's all right.
I keep meaning to turn it off. And
It's all right. I switched out to the video again, so it's all good.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I mean, the thing that people are talking about on YouTube right now is just obviously how Canon released this after the 500, and I think one thing that people need to just slow down before getting too angry at Canon obviously releasing a camera that in a lot of ways they've added features into this camera that the 500 doesn't. I'd say wait until some proper comparisons and proper lab tests come out between the two. Because already as well, Cinema 5D as I've done a lab test on the 300 Mark III and the 500 Mark II, and they're claiming that it has the 500 actually has 0.3 of a stop more usable damage range on the Mark III. But when we get back in the office, we'll do a proper comparison. We've literally just bought a bunch of like brand new lab equipment that our lens engineer Gary's just set up during quarantine. He's got like he's custom made a slider. It's like huge blackout box. And then like the slider is actually he's mounted it vertically, and that's how we're gonna do the optical height adjustments. It looks awesome. So that's gonna we've got 8K resolution charts for that. We've got dynamic range charts for that. We've got color charts. We've got everything that we need to do proper lab tests, and that's one thing.
You got that set up at Newman Street?
No, that's in Brentford. That would not fit in Newman Street.
I was going to say. Look forward to seeing that. Oh no, that sounds great. Really
so basically, once we can get back in the office and get hold of both cameras, I think that's one thing that'd be really, really awesome for people to have, because I do feel like people feel a bit hard done by who've just bought C500s for nearly double the price, and there is still a reason to buy a 500 over a 300, and again, it just comes down to what's more important to you.
I don't know. I kind of feel like if these cameras had never been released and Canon just put up a poll one day and said, how much would you pay for a 6K full frame sensor and how much would you pay for a 4K S35 sensor, that you'd probably end up with people suggesting similar kind of differences in price that there is. I feel like in a way it's almost working against Canon that it's the same body, that it's like, well, it looks the same.
Well, that I think I totally agree. I think that is actually more of the issue, because when the 500 came out, that was arguably one of its biggest pulling points. Is it's such an awesome body design for so many people. It's so versatile, and that was what drove a lot of people to it. And I feel like, yeah, if Canon had somewhat hindered the body design of the 300 and kind of, you know, added a couple of old quirky bits that from the, you know, from the older cinema EOS cameras, then yeah, people wouldn't be quite as annoyed. But yeah, at the end of the day, yeah, I can understand it from both perspectives, and you know, Canon are going to have to listen to it because it's just part of doing business. So I'd say,
you know what? I worked for Apple for years. When I first graduated from university, I got a job working for Apple. I ended up working there for about 4 years, and every single time there was a new product announcement, there would be people that would start being quite angry about, well, I bought the previous model the week before, and although I completely agree, I just think that if you even mentally begin to enter that game, it actually doesn't matter what price point or what feature set or anything that the new camera had, or the new, in that case, new computer had. It's obviously going to be better and probably cheaper, and because that's just what happens over time with technology. And you know, I know it's particularly you know, difficult for some people if they've literally just bought something, and then something, whether it's a car or a computer or a camera or anything. But I just think that you need to go into these purchases of whatever it is, to be honest, with the mindset of, does it do what I need it to do and what I want it to do now? Am I happy? And they wouldn't have bought it if they weren't happy with the features that it gave them at that time. And I would find it a bit odd if someone said, well, I bought this 6K full frame sensor, but now this other camera, you know, I wish I'd never done it because this 4K Super 35 sensor is better. It's like, well, it's a completely different type of sensor. So why, you know, if it was the body that they bought the camera for, then fine. You know, I that surely is still working for them. I don't know. It's a very muddy thing. I don't want to wade into it too much, but,
no, exactly.
Over the years, I've definitely got my head around in various industries around the just don't play that game, because you're just going to always be upset, basically.
Yeah. And these are, you know, when you buy a camera, it's a business decision as well. And yeah, I mean, if it makes sense when you buy it, it makes sense when you buy it, make your money back, and then buy another camera, make another investment that you need to make your business grow. So yeah.
And there have been far worse examples of this. You know, look what happened with Red last year when they suddenly completely altered their lineup and pricing structure for
don't.
You know, there were people who had just spent like 40,000-50,000 pound on a camera that now was, you know, they'd lost kind of 20 grand's value overnight. You know, friends of mine who are DPs who are Red owners that were, you know, having to send like emails to like Jared personally, like, for the love of God, you know, what have you done? It's like, we're not exactly talking about that kind of territory. It could be a lot worse.
Yeah, let's not get into that one.
No, fair enough.
But no, yeah, it's yeah. So I mean, yeah, wait till we'll see the comparison. But again, they're going to be different cameras, different price points.
They're both great cameras. They're both great cameras, and I think probably they're both worth what they. You know, if there's an error, I think, you know, the C300 Mark III, dare I say, it's probably slightly cheaper than I was expecting. But you know, I certainly don't think that devalues the C500 Mark II, which is an incredible camera. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, this is the year of Canon at the moment. I think.
Good on them. Good on them.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I really like that more aggressive, more sort of you know, yeah. It's an approach that I think isn't probably in Canon's nature, and I think like they've probably had to kind of take a deep breath. But it's really nice to see, because they're competing with other manufacturers who absolutely are aggressive with what they're doing, and they will try and you know, push specs that probably actually in practice aren't quite as good. What's nice about Canon is they're being more assertive and more aggressive in this way, but they've got the goods to back it up, which is really nice, because you kind of read it and go, oh, right, okay, and then you try it and it's exactly what you hoped it would be. So like I was saying right at the beginning with the 120 frames, you know, it's the best 120 frames I've seen on a camera. It's lovely, really nice.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, mate, I think that we've been going on for nearly an hour and a half now, so I think maybe it's worth wrapping it up now.
Okay, cool.
But it's been awesome, mate. Yeah, it's really nice
Thank you.
insight, and it's nice to see and hear our thoughts confirmed in what you've done as well. Pretty much, so it's good.
Perfect.
But yeah, awesome. Thank you for joining us, mate. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Ollie.
Thanks for
Take
joining us,
care.
everyone. In a bit.
Cheers.
Oh, and yeah, we'll post the links to the Vimeo, to the first look film and the Dropbox link as well for people to download.
Yeah, perfect. If you pop it in the Discord, what I'll do is I'll put it, for everyone watching on the YouTube, I'll put it in the description of YouTube so you can view it on there.
Ideal. Perfect. Lovely. Thanks, Jake.